Good afternoon and welcome to our alumni lecture series. This is part of our SIL's 90th anniversary celebration. We're extremely pleased to thank EBSCO for being the sponsor of our series of events. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. It's a beautiful day in Chapel Hill. I hope it is wherever you are. I hope everyone is being safe and strong in these trying times. And I'm looking forward to what Ericka has to say, but I'm first going to turn it over to Maggie Lasher, who will do the introduction. Maggie.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Lasher, and I'm the Secretary of the Alumni Association at SILS. I'm excited to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Ericka Patillo, the Director of Graduate Studies and Information Science at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. In summer 2016, she was the faculty lead for the SILS seminar trip to London, where I first learned of her expertise and dedication to libraries as dynamic, progressive workplaces. Her advice that we will all be managed or manage others in libraries continues to ring true today, daily in my current position. After earning her MSLS from SILS, Dr. Patillo's impressive career extended from Texas to Virginia. Later, while back at SILS for her doctorate, she taught extensively in courses such as music librarianship, library assessment, collection development, and the history of libraries. While I was a student, she was known for her excellent Management for Information Professionals course, of which she taught an impressive 12 sections during her time at UNC. Dr. Patillo completed her PhD in 2018, culminating the experience with her dissertation, The Middle Manager Role in Academic Libraries. Her research continues to focus on the many dynamics of the library workplace, with her most recent work focusing on the intersection of identity and library work, and her publication titled, What It Means to Be Out: Queer, Trans, and Gender Nonconforming Identities in Library Work. Most recently, Dr. Patillo moved into leadership roles at Appalachian State University and now at UT Knoxville, where she leads with intention and an eye for developing culturally competent professionals. And lastly, I would be remiss to not mention her talent and intense study of music. She's a professional harpist with degrees in music history and harp performance. And on that harmonious note, join me in the warm welcome of Dr. Ericka Patillo.
Hello, hello, hello. Greetings, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here, and thank you, Maggie, for that amazing introduction. You mentioned stuff that I had completely forgotten. So thank you so much for that warm introduction. So I have some preliminaries I want to share. And first of all, I slightly changed the title just a little bit. So I'm going to talk about LIS programs and are we doing enough to create inclusive professional environments. So you can just tweak that a little bit. And here's our plan for today. We're going to talk about the goal and problem, then some information about cultural hegemony. I'll share some voices from the field, and then we'll talk about some solutions and suggestions. And when I teach, one of the things I do is I have a check-in. And also one of the things I do is have music. So you heard the music. Those of you who were in early enough, you heard the music. And almost always start my classes with music, and then we do a check-in where I get to hear from the students who, usually I haven't seen in a week or so, and I get an update from them about what's been going on in their lives. I'm not going to ask all of you to tell me what's going on with you, although if you want to put some information in the chat, you may do that. That'd be great. In fact, I'd love it. I'd love to see your reactions in the chat and also, just your reactions generally. But instead of asking you to report back to me, I'm going to share a little bit more about who I am, my identities, and give some honor and respect to my ancestors. Again, you'll probably understand more about why I'm doing this in the context as I go through this presentation. So there you see my parents and sort of the places where I'm from. Some of this stuff is really new. I've recently learned that I have ancestors from among the Kru people of Liberia and the Hausa Fulani people of Nigeria, and also that some of my ancestors who lived in southeastern Virginia in the early 1800s were actually free Black people, and that has been really wonderful and interesting information for me to know. Again, there you see my naming of my identities and all the things that make me who I am. And also I want to share that I am calling in from UT Knoxville. And this campus is, excuse me, on part of the traditional territory of the Salagi peoples and the Soyaha peoples. And I want to, again, share that I am actually learning a lot more about our American indigenous populations and trying to share what I'm learning in my classes and in the program, because it's important that we acknowledge their contributions and also some of the challenges that they have experienced in the past and also that are continuing, because they are still here. I want to honor my SILS ancestors. So again, we're in the 90th year of SILS, and I just wanted to name some folks. Again, this is not a comprehensive list, obviously. I wanted to name some folks though that have passed and that I had direct interactions with and who have definitely influenced my work. And yeah, so there's again, a brief list of folks. I wanted to put their pictures up, but I did not get around to that. And I also wanted to give a shout out to, excuse me, some folks who have influenced my work in LIS and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So yeah, so again, those are some of my my influences. All right, so let's dig in here. And again, I sort of approach this kind of the way I teach. I bring in we've got some literature references in here, and we have probably more of me than I usually put in. But I wanted to bring in some of my experiences and some anecdotal information, excuse me, as part of this particular presentation. So in preparing our students to work in diverse environments, we often focus on the customers or the users rather than the students themselves and their future roles as employees in not particularly diverse, equitable, inclusive workplaces. Regardless of the preparation, if a graduate finds work in a systemically racist or heteronormative environment, the fact that they've been hired will not magically change the workplace. A new early career employee is powerless to change these working conditions. And if the workplace is unsafe and there are no allies to be found, these conditions can lead to feelings of oppression, a stifling of creativity and motivation, depression, other health issues, and finally, attrition. So why am I bringing this up this way? I feel a particular kind of heartburn in my charge to recruit students from historically underrepresented groups when I know that many of our information-related organizations are not inclusive. So will these students be able to find positions? Will they be able to thrive in these organizations? Or will they, like so many others, continue to be marginalized and then choose to leave the professions? So I want to talk some about this concept of replicating whiteness, and then and also some hegemonic practices. So I was raised, educated, and trained to replicate whiteness. What do I mean by that? So the first time I saw the term replicating whiteness was in a 2015 piece by April Hathcock, in which she shares that her parents taught her the importance of playing at whiteness. So like Hathcock, I was raised by middle-class parents who taught me how to operate and succeed in a white world. I think we can say my upbringing was successful, considering the education I attained and the positions I have held. And I know status is important to white people because almost every time I meet a white person, they ask me what I do for a living and what my position is. So I was also taught to replicate whiteness in my library science education when I was at SILS in the master's program 1997 through 1999. So this may seem awkward and a little disingenuous considering the SILS professors and leaders to whom I paid homage earlier. I mean them no disrespect, but I cannot recall any focus in the late 90s on issues of discrimination or social justice, except in relationship to human resources management and the laws we are all subject to. And I'm sad to say that I perpetuated this in my own teaching until I took the time to do better. So Hathcock uses whiteness to refer not only to the sociocultural differential of power and privilege that results from categories of race and ethnicity, it also stands as a marker for the privilege and power that acts to reinforce itself through hegemonic cultural practice that excludes all who are different. So extending this idea a little bit with an explanation of the dominant culture and hegemony, borrowing from Daniel Silva's entry in the website Whiteness, a Glossary. He describes the dominant culture term as the term as it articulates the existence of a dominant culture that has legitimized and normalized race-based power relations and Western societal hierarchies. The hegemony of whiteness can thus be found in its construction as superior and normative in terms of intelligence, creativity, beauty, health, and sexuality, all of these being tools of oppression. So let me give some examples of whiteness as hegemonic practices. And the three on this slide are examples that Hathcock mentions in her piece. So a librarian of color is mistaken for a library assistant by white colleagues at a professional conference. Genderqueer librarians are forced to choose between binary gender groupings when using the restroom at work. A librarian from a working class background in search of employment is told by well-meaning colleagues, just take a job anywhere and move. Even though the unemployed librarian lacks the financial privilege to do so. And some further examples taken from three other sources. When librarianship is characterized as a historically noble profession that has always valued democratic ideals, and is welcoming to all, and that libraries are neutral spaces. That's coming from me. I have heard that many times at work. The next one there, an information professional with an invisible disability who requests accommodations is told, if I let you do it, I'll have to let everybody else do it. And that's from a paper that I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And finally, they're from Wired, the magazine, that tech employees who are working to identify and ameliorate racial trauma as part of their jobs by recruiting more people of color or changing company culture through unconscious bias training, are at the same time being subjected to racial trauma. So again, those are some examples of whiteness as hegemonic practices. Now, my intent is not to beat up white people, nor to focus solely on race. When I started learning about anti-racism work, which was honestly not too long ago, I was taught that a power analysis is, well, powerful. So let's talk about power and privilege and the hegemonic forces at play that impact our goals of inclusion and diversity of our information professionals. I imagine some of you have seen this, this image before. This is Sylvia Duckworth's illustration of the wheel of power and privilege. And it helps us visually explore some dimensions related to power in our society. Variables such as skin color, education level, ability, etc. In the center is power, indicating that the characteristics holding those central positions are where power and privilege typically reside. And that as you move toward the outer edges of the wheel, it captures those characteristics often associated with marginalized populations. As you explore the wheel, you may also think about Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality, that various combinations of levels among these dimensions may influence a person's experience of vulnerability or marginalization. For example, a white cisgender man's access to power and experience of privilege may vary if he is also experiencing significant disability or neurodivergence. So as I explore this wheel, I think about my own identities, a lot of which I shared earlier, and where they put me in terms of access to power, and maybe help me explain some of the challenges I've had in my life and career. I also think about my students and their colleagues and the access they may or may not have to power, and how some of these dimensions are invisible. And I think about who holds the power in our information-related organizations, and how my students, who are increasingly coming from those marginalized populations, might find employment in those organizations quite challenging. So I wanted to pause a moment here and ask you, what do you see as you explore the wheel? What's resonating for you, or what's troubling? And also to think about, well, what might be missing from this wheel? And I'm hoping y'all can participate in the chat. If you are, I'm not seeing any messages. One thing you see missing is age. Yeah. Oh, and height. Yeah, body height. Yeah. How does noting that, well, you don't have to share, nobody has to share. We'll just maybe think about, how does noting that, make you all feel? I think one thing that's missing also is trauma, right? And experiences with trauma. Family situation, religion. Is religion missing? Somehow yeah. Yeah, so again, it's not a perfect, it's not a perfect wheel. But it does sort of give you some ways in which to start thinking about, you know, again, where the power is and who's got it. And also the concept of intersectionality. Okay, so appearance of one's face and smile. Yeah, missing teeth versus all teeth. Yeah. Great, thank you. Thank you so much for adding your comments in the chat. So what I'd like to, oh, one more, sorry, one more comment. The will is very well done. You introduced your book club to Thick by Tracy McMillan Cotton. Cool. And in addition to formal education, something along the lines of informal opportunities, right? So summer camps, travel, etc., that also tied to wealth in other areas. Yeah, mental health and ability to get at this a bit. Yeah, but health in general, access to insurance. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you all. And again, keep them coming, keep them coming. So I wanted to throw in some voices from folks in our fields. Right, so Mia, absolutely. If you got, yeah, you can have a lot of power, right? But if you got one sort of area of marginalization that can really impact stuff. And I'll be honest, I hate the word marginalization, but for clarity, I'm going to use it today because I think it's really negative, but here we are. So the literature and training about neurodiversity, disability, race, and other dimensions of difference are skewed toward libraries and other organizations accommodating neurodiverse, disabled, and other patrons. So there's not a whole lot of, there's not as much out there in the literature about the information professionals themselves. So several library and information professionals who have identities that fall into the marginalized dimensions have gone on record to describe their inequitable and exclusionary workplaces. And I have quite a few on some slides here. And again, this might fall outside of the norm, but I'm going to read them to you. So first off, as a person of color with visible and invisible disabilities, navigating librarianship has been a complex and oftentimes frustrating experience. Most conversations about equity and diversity in librarianship solely involve race or gender, but exclude people living with disabilities or chronic illness. Over the past 18 months, I have wanted badly to walk out of the autism closet, yet I have resisted. I believe that being open about my diagnosis could be beneficial to others, i.e. perhaps a child who has an autism diagnosis will see they can have a career and excel at something that isn't centered on a special interest. What I fear is a lack of acceptance. Indeed, I have been advised by a prominent autism therapist not to reveal my diagnosis at work unless I am looking for special accommodation. I'm not entirely sure how accepted a male autistic children's librarian would be in the world of libraries. Sometimes when I tell people I'm on the spectrum, they might say, "Really? Are you sure?" Or "I never would have known." I realize that they're probably trying to be nice, but it comes across as dismissive and patronizing and causes me to feel like I need to prove my diagnosis. It also makes for an awkward conversation because it's hard to easily respond to those comments, especially if you don't know the person well. Autism can be very much misunderstood. Many associate it with characteristics such as being completely nonverbal or physically rocking back and forth or flapping hands, which don't apply to me. Does my learning and disability affect my job as a librarian? Yes, it does. It's hard to look up words in a database if you can't spell them. However, that fact has never stopped me at all. Being a dyslexic librarian does not mean I cannot do my job. I just adapted different ways to get it done. I love being a librarian, and I am not going to allow dyslexia stop me from doing it. When you talk about imposter syndrome, well, yeah, I am an imposter because I show up every day as someone else. And the better I can become at being someone else, the better I'll thrive at this company. As one participant with type 1 diabetes says, I do get the usual stupid comments from colleagues such as, oh, I didn't think you could eat cake. It's annoying, and I usually try and explain about how diabetes treatments have progressed since 1921. I guess I know it comes from a good place, but it's still annoying. And last one here, there was another librarian who was also hard of hearing, but she was less hard of hearing than I was and coped extremely well in a way that was a disadvantage for me because it was, well, she's hard of hearing and she can get everything. So yes, I cherry picked these. There might be differently abled folks who are experiencing equitable and inclusive workplaces. But today I wanted to shed some light on those who aren't, who have experienced challenges. And they may not form some quantitative majority, but their experiences matter. So the last two are from a study completed that was published in 2019. It's a study on systemic workplace barriers for academic librarians with disabilities. And in it, the author reported that 3.7% of librarians in the United States have disabilities. And that number is 5.9% in Canada. The participants in the study reported a range of disabilities, from mental health disabilities and anxiety to mobility-related disabilities and chronic illnesses. And 9 of the 10 participants reported invisible disabilities, and 1 reported a visible disability. Again, I'm including this because it's an important piece of research, and there's not a lot of research like this done yet. So the author talks about a misconception about what disability is. And that this misconception can be explained by disability studies theory. That the standard cultural assumption is that everyone is able-bodied and people with invisible disabilities appear on the surface to be able-bodied, making it more difficult to accept that invisible disability is genuine or equivalent to visible disability. And I'll ask you to consider, I talked about this idea of replicating whiteness and the dominant culture and hegemonic practices, and to consider if that's what we're seeing here in this misconception about what disability is. And Ericka Brody mentions, yeah, 3.7% seems like an undercount. That's possibly so. So my heartburn and internal conflict about why I'm asking these questions. So in my new role as Director of Graduate Studies at School of Information Sciences at UT Knoxville, I am involved in recruitment and retention of our students. And the work is often centered around diversifying our student body, which should, of course, lead to eventually diversifying our professions. So as a longtime librarian and administrator in the academy, and as a member of a historically underrepresented group, I believe we focus on the wrong stuff. That adding numbers of diverse individuals rather than creating and maintaining equitable and inclusive environments. So I meet with prospective students, many of whom ask about our school's climate for equity and inclusion. And I do believe we have made strides in those areas and that we are motivated and have mechanisms in place to continually improve. I do feel that certainly at SIS, and I'm sure other LIS programs can say the same. But when these prospective students also ask me about equity and inclusion in their future information-related professions and workplaces, I take a deep breath and attempt to share what I can about the landscape. I also teach and advise in the program, and in those roles I encounter our current students who are increasingly different from a wide range of ethnicities and cultures, genders, age groups, religions, physical abilities, neurodiversities, and mental health. So how do I know? It's not like we're keeping numbers on all of these. But in some of my classes, we voluntarily disclose our multicultural identities, again, just like I did at the beginning. So we can normalize difference and also realize we are not alone, especially regarding our invisible identities. So in my experience, and as you've heard in my presentation, our information-related professions are problematic when it comes to equitable and inclusive environments. Many of our organizations have diversity statements and committees, action plans, and we probably all participated in diversity trainings or book group readings. Especially in the wake of the catalytic social justice events of 2020, many of our organizations released diversity and support statements, and the jury is still out on if these will have any impact. And in fact, I and some sales colleagues have done some research on those events of last year and these diversity statements, and that's in a forthcoming publication. So these are elements that are contributing to my heartburn. So what's to be done? Again, I present here some, they're not really solutions and suggestions, they're questions, and again, I'm going to present an opportunity for you all to share your ideas too. So I know a number of iSchools are, have created sort of entrepreneurship paths as part of their programming and their programs. And I'm thinking that's a good way to, for us to teach folks that they can take their, the competencies and training they get in our schools and go do their own thing, right? So then that would not expose them to as much to these organizations. There's a lot going on if you're members of a community, especially from the underrepresented groups, shall we say. There's lots going on in those communities, in our communities. And as I, again, get to know what's going on in Knoxville, I'm actually starting to participate in what I'll call these one-off trainings in some of these communities, so they can get an idea about, how to curate their data, how to organize their information, how to use those skills to, be a part of their successful, hopefully successful business ventures. I think we need to look at making our organizations more accountable to their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. There's some examples out there about DEI scorecards. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, ALA put one out recently. But can we use those kinds of things to evaluate our students' potential workplaces? I think we need to continue to think about compassion, empathy, and DEI accommodations, not just for our communities of users, but also focusing on our colleagues, again, students in our programs, and then, how they're, learning to be in community with each other, and how maybe that can change our organizations too. I want to also, sort of ask us to think about what we're learning from the pandemic. Often hear people say, including myself, I'm ready to return back to normal. And for us to really think about what can we learn from the pandemic that can make the work environment more equitable, inclusive, and navigable for our marginalized friends. So, those who don't find traveling to work every day to be, all that manageable, and do they need to do that? So this idea of returning to normal for some is not equitable. I want us to think about this moving away from the norm of this is how work is done. So we have this norm from the dominant culture that this is how work is done, that we all know how work is done, and we all adjust to it. But can we be inclusive of different modes, different paces, different places, and different styles? So most people don't sign up for information work because they thrive in competitive environments, but our organizational work environments are increasingly competitive, focused on productivity and efficiencies. And again, I ask us to think, is this the dominant culture's hegemonic practices at play? In my view, the focus on diversity and simply employing folks who fall into the marginalized categories doesn't move the needle much. I mean, in our the stats out there tell us that. But it's in part because we learn how to replicate whiteness and perpetuate the existing heteronormative ableist systems in order to keep our jobs and to be successful. Or we quit, reclaiming our time and effort. We go into recovery from PWIs, and we develop our side hustles into safe, rewarding vocations. And again, I'll ask, if our organizations were more inclusive, would that culture shift? And I do wonder when that's going to happen and if it's already too late. So I want to hear from you. Is this really a problem? Am I making this up? Right? So I think for those so-called marginalized groups, people of color, those with disabilities and chronic illnesses, genderqueer, those with neurodiversities and learning disabilities, there's constantly an effort for those folks to try to fit in. So we don't feel we belong. We need transformation. So what responsibility do LIS programs have to encourage information-related workplaces to be more inclusive? What ideas do you have to bridge this gap? And again, am I alone in believing that this is a problem? Am I the only one with heartburn about recruiting underrepresented groups to our programs and organizations? And I will actually, again, if you want to participate, I'll put the Padlet link in the chat. You can go in there anonymously and maybe add, add what you think. And I can, of course, take a look at it later. I'm looking for ideas. I don't really have a lot of solutions. But I would love to hear y'all's experiences, and again, if your perspective on this issue. So there's a question in the chat. As a part of the student learning experience, how can workplaces offering practicum and internship opportunities better support marginalized students? Are there ways workplaces can collaborate with LIS programs to do so? Yeah. And also in my role, I'm actually practicum coordinator too, and I probably need to be paying more attention to that when we're setting up these relationships with organizations. That might be something to do. All right, okay, so I see someone with a hand up. I'm not sure I can give permission to anybody to do anything. Gary, can you? Or maybe
I can let her.
Okay.
Irene, you should be able to now.
Irene, you can talk. I think you're still muted.
I unmuted myself.
Okay, we can hear you now.
You can hear me? Okay. So Ericka, first I want to congratulate you on the topic. It is very, very viable. And I think for us to admit that there is a problem means that there's hope for our responding to it. I think in terms of some suggestions of what we can do, I'm sorry I missed you, Ericka. I graduated in 1995, and things have changed in the academy. For a long time, research topics on what we are discussing were not very welcoming. That has changed, and it needs to remain so. People need to be encouraged to conduct research in all of these areas. I think the other thing is that racism and all these other isms, whether it has to do with disabilities or whatever, can be very stressful. And I think that we need to work more closely with human resources management to come up with more strategies. You know, there needs to be a place where people can go in a high school, but there also needs to be a place that the university affords that also provides training in these areas. And I think the research that said, you know, we can't legislate attitudes, but we can say what are acceptable and unacceptable behaviors in the workplace.
Mhm.
And I think we need to put more emphasis there. You know, there are not things we can legislate. I think the other thing is to, and the Library of Congress did it a long time ago, when they came up with their diversity statement, they included diversity issue, however you want to frame it, as a part of one's work performance. In other words, things like what have you done or what are you doing to help make the work environment a more safe place, a more productive place for people. And I think that that is an area that we need to work more on. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Irene, for sharing those ideas and also sort of catching us up on what's already been going on. Yeah, in my experience, sort of one of my takeaways, especially having worked in administration, is that I think people want to see change. They want change to happen. I don't think folks are often resistant to change, right? But even those who aren't resistant to change, I think there's not a lot of space and time created or given in the workplace to actually make those changes. And I found that extremely frustrating because again, you get this information from on high, yeah, diversity is important, right? And then here's ways in which, here's some things you need to do. But let's say, for instance, if you're teaching, right? And I want to change how I don't know, even creating my PowerPoint slides so they can be more accessible. When do I have time to do that? I think there's not a lot of time and space given to, in our organizations, given to change, even when we want to make some changes. Let's see, there's some more in the chat. So I've been thinking a lot about the hiring issue and just recently realized that the focus needs to be on changing my workplace first. Yeah, the first step is changing the culture so that inclusivity is the norm. It is a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift. But again, I hope you understand my heartburn. I'm like, okay, do I want to cause folks more harm, right? By recruiting them in and saying, oh yeah, come on in and you help us change. Yeah, thank you for that comment, Amanda. And I see there's some folks adding to the Padlet. I'm not going to try to flip and share that. If you want to see what's over there in the Padlet, you can follow the link. I can put it in again, just in case you want to see that. So thank you, those of you who are putting things in the Padlet. Thank you so much. So are there any questions, any other questions out there that folks would like me to address?
Ericka, I have a question.
Sure.
Since starting to work with students, I'm slowly getting those emails and requests to talk about the career and the field. So I'm curious about what tips you have when working in sort of those one-on-one conversations, when you have to be like, hey, you know what? There's a lot of wonderful things about this field, but there's also a lot of harsh realities. And I think that, we examine those today. So what tips do you recommend as to those of us who are probably having those conversations? And I would appreciate your perspective, especially as someone who is a director of graduate study.
I say be truthful, be authentic. Say what you know. I think it's also useful to throw some statistics in there. Again, when I teach, I think it's pretty clear sometimes what my perspective is, but I try to also, well, I don't try, I do, bring in, the outlook for the professions, some, evidence from the literature about, what's real. And also, when I have personal conversations with folks, I just make sure they understand that if I'm giving my perspective and my opinion, that they understand it is that. So sometimes, again, it depends on, typically, especially a prospective student who asks me about that, they have a reason for asking me that, right? It's probably not the student who needs the most help in terms of understanding that there's some issues going on in terms of inclusion in our schools and our professions. So when they ask me, I sort of already know there's something going on. They might be, a member of the choir, so to speak. And so I feel like I can be frank. And I think my perception is that because of my frankness, they understand that when I say we're working on stuff, that we're legit working on stuff. We know we're not perfect, but we are, motivated and committed to change. I have a friend who's a this is her work. She does this work among in higher education. She is an inclusive excellence expert and works with, you know, faculty in higher ed. And I actually asked her a couple of weeks ago, I said, give me an example of an organization that's got this figured out, that's inclusive, and I could say, hey, y'all go work there. And she said, she couldn't give me any. She said, it's work, it's ongoing, and that we're gonna have to continue to do this. And of course, I was actually quite disappointed to hear her say that. But again, we just have to keep doing it. We have to keep trying it. And Maggie, I hope that addresses your question. That's my 2 cents.
No, it does. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Sure. So Lori asks, how can professional development organizations help with initiatives to improve inclusivity in different work settings? I don't know, Lori, what do you think? Be like a teacher and flip that, right?
I wanted to hear from you, Ericka, because, you know, we spend a lot of time encouraging LIS students to join professional development organizations. And similar to your thoughts on joining an organization that doesn't have inclusivity at the heart of what they're doing, you know, should we encourage this if it's not the venue for making change? So yeah. I was wondering what you thought.
Well, I'm going to ping back actually to something that I'm going to still call her Dean Irene Owens said, you know, engaging our human resources departments. In fact, when I was looking for some literature for that forthcoming chapter I talked about, again, where we looked at how organizations last year were putting out diversity statements, et cetera. I actually came upon some literature from the HR world that actually talked about how, you know, steps within the HR that can be where HR folks can actually have, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion, these kinds of ideas as their goals, and to help the entire organization sort of formulate goals that can, again, keep the needle moving. So I think there's some movement in the HR world. Again, if we could probably examine some more of that literature, and then have our, you know, professional development groups, you know, really sort of tap into that. That might be helpful.
Thank you.
Sure, sure. So be sure to read that chapter when it comes out. We're working on reviewers' comments now. And I'll just, since I've been talking about it, I'll say, so it's a piece that I wrote with Samaya Ahmed, Angela Murillo, and Rachel Clemens. And I know some of you know those folks. So. Oh yeah, think about thinking about retention first rather than recruitment first. Kim reading Hillary's comment. You're in the process of providing feedback on our library's framework for diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, all the slashes. There's a lot of privilege that the folks giving feedback have that impacts the kind of feedback that is given. Yeah, that's a very good point. Cool, yeah, think about it. One of the things I tease my friends about, because my friends are my friends, they're like me. We are so, you know, we got all these degrees, we're highly educated, and I have to remind them, we're not normal. We're not the norm. How can we bring in different ideas, right? We have to get outside of our bubble, our small worlds, right? So there's a question in the Q&A. I'll bring it up. Are we good on time if I just read this question, Gary?
Sure, go ahead and read the question.
Okay. It seems like this is focused on reforming libraries, but isn't that a futile endeavor that ultimately perpetuates whiteness in libraries while making minimal changes? What about working on supporting the development of alternative spaces, institutions for knowledge culture? I'm right there. I'm right there with you. Whoever you are, if you want to keep talking about that, contact me. I am right there with you. Yep.
Well, it's good that we ended on an easy one.
Well, it's not easy to do, because that would be like dismantling a system, right? The whole.
Well, exactly. That's my point. It's.
Oh.
Yeah. Ericka, I'm just so happy that I get to occasionally be in your bubble. We miss you here in Chapel Hill. I know that Knoxville is really fortunate to have you, leading their efforts in recruitment and helping with students. You've given us really thoughtful and courageous presentation today that I hope will feed continued discussion. And I think it helps us think really more broadly about being inclusive to everyone, which is, I think, what we all really want. And there aren't any easy solutions. This is an ongoing process. We're not going to just solve our social problems with checklists and sort of annual reports in which we click off that we've accomplished this or that. It's a continuous process, and we need leaders like you to keep reminding us that we have a lot of work to do, and we are making progress, and we need to be reflective and thoughtful. So I want to thank you so much. We are so proud of you as an alumna of this program, and I can tell from the activity in the chat that there's energy and enthusiasm, and wish you continued excellence. Look forward to reading your latest piece as it comes out, and other things that I know you're working on as well. So again, thank you. Congratulations for a great hour well spent.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure to spend this time with y'all.